Hello, guys, and welcome to another episode of What If Civilization Started Over. In the last episode, we saw quite a few events happen, but the big one being right up here as the mighty Baikal Empire has fallen. And there's probably quite a few fans of, or there probably was quite a few fans of Baikal, but, well, not any, well, I mean, there still could be, but Baikal doesn't exist anymore. Right. We saw a couple other smaller events happen around the world, but let's get started with today's episode, which is going to start off with Sumatra. If I could be on the right layer for once. And also, not remember to save that, but we can get rid of this. Once again, wrong layer. Right, there we go. Alright, so we're going to come down to Sumatra, as maybe you figured it out already, but they're becoming more expansionist. And they have the next country they're going to invade right up their coast. And they're going to be joined by another nation in this invasion. But they send their troops right through the Philippines as they declare war on the island survivors. Now, one issue with that is they're not the only island survivor group out there. There's more up, well, not really any more up here. There's some out here, though. Like most notably, there's also groups like here. But they don't really care. They get a ton of backlash, not just from other nations, but even from some of their own people. However, it doesn't really come to their mind that people don't like this invasion. They take the Philippine capital, the Filipino capital, and eventually the island survivors are holding out on just the island up here. Well, in the Philippines region. Over here, we see a very similar event taking place. However, this time, somebody else decides to get involved in the war. Australia will also join the war, getting backlash. They get backlash as well. However, uh, they don't really care. Everyone, if the entire world coalitioned these two, it would still be a hard fight. These two together, maybe. It would be a hard fight no matter what. But well, these two aren't even the only ones doing this either. This definitely would make it a lot harder for the world to coalition them, as Caribbean joins the war. They kind of just want to take over some of these islands out here. Still, they send their navy out. They take over like all of these islands. Alright, Caribbean isn't done with just going to take over all of these. No, they make a landing in Fiji as well, and they take over this island. And this is actually going to be probably one of the simplest peace treaties ever. So all I have to do is draw on the border for New Guinea, and that'll be it. The island survivors are completely collapsing. They really didn't last long at all. Well, I mean, they did, actually. They've existed for, what, almost 30 episodes now? But their time has come. As even though their big policy was like advancing technology as fast as possible, um, it, Sumatra also adopted a similar policy. So it just didn't last long. But there you have it. The island survivors are officially gone. So let's take a look at the peace treaty and move to the next event. Alright, so here we have the very simple peace treaty. Just color in that. Also not there. And then I can just simply do this. And I have to go all the way over here to the Caribbean color and do that. Alright, so we're kind of having a new colonial empire here now. As we see with Caribbean, they've got colonies in Africa, they've got a colony down here, and they're starting to colonize in Oceania. Even Sumatra, they got a couple smaller colonies up there. Alright, but now let's move on to the next event of this episode, which is going to be a very major event. Over here, despite being two separate ideologies, we see Caucasia and Istanbul, a fascist and communist country, will jointly declare war on Crimea. And, well, it goes, well, let's see how it goes. It goes extremely well to start, as Caucasia invades up through here. But now we have a very interesting event happening. As we see Russia will decide to involve themselves in the war. Now, one thing about the Holy See Alliance is if a country declares war on them, then they have to fight back. Well, they don't necessarily do that. Oh, they do. Just we see Caspia is really the only country that begins to fight Russia. However, Russia seems to have forgotten that Caspia exists, so Caspia gets quite a lot of land just to start off in this war. However, there's another country that is not in the Holy See Alliance that might want some land back out of Russia. And that's the Gold Team. Russia took a little bit of land up here, and now they're here to take more land out of Russia. And this isn't really coalition at all, but it it almost is. So we see the Gold Team pushing against Russia. They move up to capture these two cities here. Now they're stopped a little bit short. And Russia continues pushing through Crimea over here. However, Russia will decide to start focusing the majority of their forces here, as Crimea is, for whatever reason, actually putting up a good fight. Wait a minute. Russia versus the Ukraine nation putting up a good fight. Sounds familiar. We even see a very, very small counter invasion here by Crimea. However, that is very quickly put down, not by Russian forces, but by Caucasian forces. And Caucasia will instead decide to start their invasion of Russia. Never thought that the day would come that Caspia and Caucasia are working together. But if you think these are the only countries joining this war, of course not. We see Kaliningrad over here. They join. Their long lost brother in Estonia is, well, long lost. But I guess think of it as like they missed their brother and now they're here to come to get them back. So Russia suddenly is getting jumped now. However, Russia has one single trick up their sleeve that turns the entire tide of the war. There's another nation here that happened to have gotten land out of one of the Holy See Alliance members. Well, actually, two nations, but more specifically, Persia. And Russia says, well, if you're invading us because we invaded you to get land, what about Persia? And the response, Persia was doing it, or Persia got land out of it because of the um, coalition up here, not because they directly invaded the actual alliance. Although they did directly invade Caspia, but uh, it's they'd say it's fine that Persia did it, but it's not fine that Russia did it. That also is definitely part because they absolutely hate Russia. So, but there's another odd thing that happens when we come up to the alliance layer. We actually see the gold team will join the Triangle Alliance. And not just the gold team, but also the Baltic nation, oddly enough. This is made up of post Great Empire nations, but now two nations, one of which I don't never think it ever even bordered the Great Empire, are now in this alliance. Very confusing, but it is what it is. So that is later. No, it's also the wrong layer. Alright, so now we see the entire alliance is activated against Russia. Crimea will push Russia out of their country. However, they're kind of dooms, but they still have to fight against Caucasia, who's just captured the Crimean capital. So, alright, down in Istanbul, they also finally join the war, and they start pushing through Crimea. They take over all of this over here, and they also decide now is the perfect time to invade the blue team, and they quickly take them over. And as if fighting two fronts isn't enough, Caucasia will decide to go after Azerbaijan. And this is probably the biggest mistake. One of the biggest mistakes. It's not a mistake by Caucasia. Azerbaijan didn't have their military. It wasn't readied or anything. They knew that it was probably likely Caucasia would invade them, but fairly quickly, their capital is surrounded. And up here, it's pretty much no different to Russia. And would you believe it? Yet another country will join this war, and that is the Swedish Union, the Swedish Norway Union. I call them Swede, but they take over quite a bit of land up in the north here. However, their main focus is to get some better lands in the south. And yet again, one more nation will be joining this war. Gosh dang it. Well, you know what? At least it's easy this time. At least this time it's an easy fix, unlike the last one. Wrong color. That's better. Okay. My bad on that. Alright. But we come over here as Siberia will also be invading Russia. Mm, But there's like no forces out here. So we see Siberia is pretty easily pushing through Russia. And unfortunately for the gold team, Siberia gets to these two major cities first, which kind of pisses the gold team off, because that was part of the reason they joined the war. But they still push out this way. We see the Baltic nation here will push through a bit further in Russia, eventually capturing the capital, not without help though. There is another nation that isn't directly involved in this war that is definitely helping. We see Crimea still fighting on, even though their capital is long gone. But pretty much soon after, their country is split in half between Caucasia and uh, Istanbul. And we see Caucasia also pushing into Russia more, taking over, pushing through some of the Russian claims. This is one of the weirdest wars in history for sure. Another weirdest war in history could easily be the war in my viewer WICSO between Anatolia and the Greek Union. That resulted the two countries fight each other and result in becoming a union with each other. Speaking of your WICSO, it should be out by the time you guys are watching this, unless I'm being lazy still, which I probably am. But we're not going to talk about that. But with the capturing of Russia's capital, we see them eventually will decide to surrender, and we'll take a look at a peace treaty, not just for this war, but also down here. Alright, so here we have the peace treaty. We'll start off down here. This will probably be easier. You see the purple team gains quite a lot of land right in here. And all of this land here remains under the blue team. However, they are very small. Small blue team. Alright, Caucasia, probably one of the countries that gained the most land out of this war. Azerbaijan is... Dang it. Always one pixel right down here. Oops. So they get quite a bit of land, not just from Azerbaijan, also over here they get land from Crimea, and up here they get quite a bit of land from Russia. So, very big Caucasia we have going on here. Right. Over here we see Crimea is still existing. They are very small right now. Up here we see the purple Istanbul team has gotten quite a lot of land as well. They didn't get any land out of Russia. Uh, Up here, let's talk about this. So, so obviously Estonia is getting this land. Oh, that's right. That's why it's not freaking. So, obviously Estonia is getting this land. So firstly, I can do that. But obviously Estonia gets this land out of Russia. They lost quite a bit of land up here, which probably a bit more valuable land. But also they get uh, not just there, they also get these islands out here. And despite being one of the oldest nations in the entire world, uh, Estonia, Estonia is like still, or Leningrad is still really close with Estonia. Their capital also is going to be right there still. Um, but yeah, these two are like the inseparable brothers. And I used brothers as a reference earlier too. Like I said, least one pixel every spot. Right, so we see Sweden getting all of this, as well as these 2 pixels there, which means the rest of that's going to go over to Russia, but we're still not done. Caspia, they had a lot of like borderline, like on the province borders kind of invasions. But they take all of that. So Caspia grew once again after the war. Over here we see the gold team. They took quite a lot out of Russia, way more than what they once had in this territory. But they kind of didn't really get their goal, so maybe it's a bit fair. We see Siberia, however, they get a lot of land out of Russia. This means the rest of this land goes over to Russia. No other countries. Alright. Okay. And you probably noticed I skipped over a little bit over in Crimea. Well, we're going to talk about that after I'm done with this. Oh, yeah, so for whatever odd reason, Russia was really keen on keeping these two islands. So, who knows what that's about. However, however, deci- despite being on the losing side of this war, we see Russia gains these two large sections of land from Crimea. They didn't quite get to what they wanted, which was access to the Black Sea. In fact, they lost access to the sea. But it it was they get land and it's pretty decent-ish land, I guess. However, we're gonna go back to the capitals layer, as we see not just Russia but also Crimea changing capitals. Right. So Russia is going to move their capital a bit further in their border. This is like the furthest north major city they actually have. And for Crimea, they're going to move theirs right here, just a bit further from Caucasia or Istanbul. Initially, they were planning to move it up into this major city, but Russia took it, so they really couldn't. Alright, so now that's done and over with. And, should pulled up my list. Alright, alright then. So, for the next event, we see happening. Uh, just let me put it up. Alright, alright. So, after a very long while, we see not one but two nations are going to join up with the Square Alliance. Those nations being Switzerland, who's been wanting to join for who knows how long. The other nation is here, Sweden. They've also wanted to join for a bit. However, this alliance is mostly communist countries, and they're communist enough. And we also see Estonia joining up with the Triangle Alliance, the Holy Sea Alliance. So it's growing its borders quite a bit. All right. As for the next event we are going to be right down here. I'm just going to do something real quick. All right. So, all those were erased. However, Mozambique is going to stay in this alliance. Let's just erase this one. Alright, so Mozambique stays in the Circle Alliance. However, pretty much everyone else is going to leave or is gone. Also down here. That happened quite a few episodes ago. I probably should have removed it by now, but. Alright, so we're going to be talking about these here 5 fascist African countries, being Tanzania, Seafoam Sudan, Libya, Somalia, and the leader of them, despite also being the smallest of them, we have Eritrea, and other capitals in Djibouti, but I'm gonna call them Eritrea. Alright, but by a leader of them, I mean they are the leader of their alliance, which is the. Nah, I'm gonna torture myself too. The parallelogram alliance. No, we're not gonna have that many parallels. The Arrow Alliance. There we go. We have the Arrow Alliance between these 5 grand African fascist nations. However, there is one other country, not in Africa, that will be joining up with said alliance. All the way up in Baikal. And if you think, oh, we're done talking about alliances, well, you're wrong. So now we have a cross alliance forming. And this one is a similar kind of story to the Circle Alliance. However, uh, these countries are mainly in fear of Caribbean invading them. And it consists of some pretty big countries. America, for example, the Orange Team. We even see a couple Pentagon members like Nova Scotia, New York, and the Red Team here, and the Pink Team here, joining up. And the biggest player of them all in this alliance, Michigan. You thought it was going to be West Mexico, didn't you? Well, you're wrong. However, it also goes down to Blue Chile, the Green Team here, and the Pink Team. And actually, even the Yellow Team joins. So, a big alliance, pretty much every border that Caribbean has, except for the 2 big, strong countries that they border, and then the 2 Circle Alliance members over here. However, well, one of the Circle Alliance members. Alright. We have one more event for this episode. And do you want to know why Russia has wanted to hold on to these islands? Well, we're updating the nuclear now. And that is because not just 1 or 2, 3 or 4 or 5, but a total of 7 countries have developed nukes. The 2 countries with nukes here aren't really don't really have the ability to make nukes right now. They're kind of weakened from the war still. But the first country that is developing nukes here, we see is actually Tanzania. They only make 1, but it's 1 too many for Mozambique. So Mozambique will up them and make 2 nukes. Mesopotamia will create a total of 4 more nukes, giving themselves 5, making them the largest nuclear power in the world. 2 nukes are developed by Russia, which are located in these 2 islands, funnily enough. Down here, Sumatra, they create 4 nukes. So still falling behind Mesopotamia a little bit. Alright, the next country developing nukes is actually going to be Persia, only developing one, but they get it from the resources they just got access to up here. Oh, Caribbean. So, you know how I said Mesopotamia is the largest nuclear power in the world? That still stands. Suddenly, out of nowhere, three nukes go missing from Caribbean's arsenal. Nobody knows where they go off to. But we do see another country also making one nuke, which is Michigan. And Michigan's kind of like the big trading hub in the northern part of these countries, other than Caribbean. But these guys don't like Caribbean even, so West Mexico is a bit more fitting. But all right, wait, who was I? Oh, yes, of course. The last country to develop a nuke is South China when they develop two nukes. Alright, that will do it for today's episode of What If Civilization Started Over. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.